we have seen lots of criticism across the world, but of course, it's a muted criticism of the United States. So, what are the arguments for and against the U.S. military operation in Venezuela, and especially the capturing of Maduro and his wife?
It's important to note, first of all, that this was a law enforcement operation by the United States. Recall that Nicolas Maduro had been indicted under the Trump administration. He was and has not been recognized as the quote unquote president of Venezuela going back to the first Trump administration, all through the Biden administration and into the second Trump administration, nor by the European Union, nor by many countries around the world. But he was indicted as the head of the Cartel de los Soles, which is an international criminal enterprise and narco-terrorist cartel, which happens to sit in Caracas. And it was a law enforcement operation. And you'll note from the videos that it was the Drug Enforcement Administration agents that arrested Nicolas Maduro. But the U.S. Constitution gives the U.S. president the ability to order the military to assist federal law enforcement authorities if they believe those law enforcement authorities may be imperiled or hindered by actors on the ground in carrying out those law enforcement operations. So it was a military operation in support of a law enforcement arrest and extradition of Nicolas Maduro as head of the international drug cartel de los Soles back to New York.
Mm-hmm. So if the stated goal of this operation was to capture Maduro for trial on various charges. So what is the rationale for U.S. involvement in Venezuela's oil industry then?
Many administrations have been very critical of both this current Maduro regime and the previous Hugo Chavez regime for nationalizing American energy assets that have been built up over the decades in Venezuela, especially those of Chevron, but also other companies like ExxonMobil, Conoco, and others. And so these regimes, these narco-terrorist criminal enterprises have expropriated what were lawful American assets, American proceeds, American investments, and plowed them into their own illegal operations. The idea now is for the United States to work with what we hope will be a democratically elected Venezuelan government to restore Venezuela's oil industry to the benefit of the Venezuelan people and the Venezuelan economy. We all know very well that Venezuela sits atop of the world's largest proven oil reserves in the world, about 300 billion gallons of oil, worth anywhere from $8 to $16 trillion. And the U.S. will work with subsequent Venezuelan governments to rebuild that country's very valuable oil industry, to rebuild Venezuela's economy, and hopefully to help restore it to a level of normal diplomatic relations with all of its South American neighbors, rather than being an agent of destabilization, of criminal operations, and of exporting mayhem, drugs, gangs, and the like into the United States and other countries in the Western Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm. Countries in the global south have expressed concern that the U.S. actions in Venezuela could set a precedent. Should other nations in Latin America or even places like Greenland have similar concerns, or should they worry?
I think what happened in Venezuela is very much singular in nature, given the fact that it was, again, a non-legitimate, unelected, or election-stealing, quote unquote, Nicolas Maduro, who headed that government over the years. So I don't think there's a parallel to any other situation with any other country in the Western Hemisphere. Let us be clear, though, the Trump administration did release its national security strategy in late November, stating that the Western Hemisphere would become a reprioritized regional theater of great concern, of utmost concern for United States security, stability, and overall hemispheric prosperity and peace, and that the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine gives the United States the right to use military means, if necessary, in order to expel adversaries, non-hemispheric malign powers such as the Communist Party of China, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, or any other malign power from the Western Hemisphere. And that's exactly what's taken place here now with the end of the Maduro regime in Caracas. I think it's going to be a very different future for the Chinese Communist Party, which was able to leverage $60 billion in loans to build out infrastructure to support the Maduro cronies and the narco-terrorist cartels in Caracas in exchange for deeply discounted oil. Russia has been sending advanced fighter jets and other military hardware and military trainers to teach Maduro's police to repress 30 million Venezuelans impoverished under socialism. And Iran had dispatched its Hezbollah terrorist proxy into Venezuela to engage in terror training operations with the Venezuelan military and police, and to conduct narcotics trafficking and money laundering through Venezuela to enrich Hezbollah in Lebanon and enable Hezbollah to conduct terror operations throughout the Middle East and in Europe. All of these adversaries are now, over time, going to find themselves expelled from an increasingly American-influenced Venezuelan democratic government in Caracas.
Many argued that if narco-terrorism was the primary reason, then why not Ecuador or Colombia? Why Venezuela? Because Venezuela has huge oil reserves.
I think that's part of it, very frankly. And President Trump has made no bones about the fact that the United States now controls an enormous portion of the global oil market, either directly through the United States homeland and our very abundant oil and, frankly, natural gas reserves, but now with the assertion of control over Venezuela's oil industry. But I think more fundamentally, whatever one thinks of the nature of the regimes, the governments in Colombia, in Ecuador, and in other countries, and frankly, Ecuador, we think, is moving now in a more positively aligned and harmonized foreign policy. Colombia's government will continue to be a problem for the United States, but these are duly elected governments. It's a very different situation than what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela's government was not recognized as a legitimate government by the United States, by the European Union, and by a number of our allies and partners around the world. And so it was a law enforcement extraction operation in Caracas from a legal perspective in Washington that was backed up by a military operation to protect our law enforcement agents. There's nothing along these lines that is being considered for Colombia, for Ecuador, or for that matter, for Cuba or Nicaragua. I think those regimes in Managua and in Havana need to be concerned not so much about a U.S. law enforcement extraction operation, but about the impending collapse, or potential, I should say, of those regimes because of their overt dependence on cheap Venezuelan oil in exchange for intelligence agencies and paramilitary operatives in Venezuela and other activities that boosted Maduro's hold on power. Now that Maduro is out, I think you'll see a very diminishing situation both in Cuba and in Nicaragua that has nothing to do with any type of a direct military or law enforcement operation out of the United States, but simply because those are failed states, failed socialist collectivist states that were dependent on Venezuela's oil wealth to prop up their economies. And now that will likely be denied to them, their own people will come to turn against those governments, we hope, and maybe bring about a restoration of democracy in Cuba, in Nicaragua, and wherever else the people choose to do so organically from within.
India has issued a measured statement expressing a deep concern without directly naming the US. How might the Trump administration interpret this response? Or does it indicate that India is not a primary focus for the US at this moment?
India is always a very important focus of the United States. It is one of our most critical partners in Asia and on a global scale. But this was an operation that was conducted, again, under the national primacy theory, the paradigm that we see written out in the Trump White House national security strategy. It's a very easy paper for anyone in your audience or anyone in the world to download. It's only 33 pages. but it's very clear the Western Hemisphere will be a primary theater of concern for the United States. And I'm sure at the appropriate time, there are American officials in the White House or in the State Department that are reaching out to Prime Minister Modi's office to explain the basis for this, to explain what American plans are going forward. And we very much respect India's position. We may not agree 100%, but that means that we will continue to work together in the areas that we do harmonize our relations and our policies with, and those areas that we disagree on, we simply disagree on. But the United States is not going to be checking the box on the concerns or the positions of all of our important partners around the world before undertaking an operation that is critical, as the White House feels right now, to America's security interest and, frankly, to our homeland security, given the fact that Venezuela was the conduit for massive amounts of cocaine and other drugs into the United States, destroying our youth, decaying our society, and also the release of tens of thousands of inmates, prison inmates, gangsters, and other very dangerous people to prey on the American people in horrific criminal ways. So this issue hopefully is beginning to be resolved, and we will continue to work with India on the areas that are of paramount importance in the bilateral relationship and our shared concerns for security, peace, and prosperity for the Indian people, for all the people of Asia, and for our shared international concerns.
After this operation, do you think that importance of OPEC or Middle East countries like Saudi Arabia or Emirates, that will be diminished in US geopolitics?
I don't think there'll necessarily be a diminution, but the extent to which the U.S. is successful in controlling the oil industry and working with the Venezuelan government to rebuild the oil industry. Keep in mind that Venezuela used to export 4 million barrels a day into global markets, and under Maduro's and Hugo Chavez's failed socialist collectivist policies, their narco-terrorist policies, Venezuela was only exporting 1 million barrels a day, mostly to China, and then piecemeal to Cuba, Nicaragua, and other regional allies. Now, hopefully, and it'll take a while, it could take anywhere from 5 to 7 years to fully rebuild Venezuela's oil industry, given the enormous damage that's been done by these failed socialist policies under Maduro and Chavez. But there could be a very significant impact on global oil markets. But the U.S. will likely continue to work with our partners in OPEC, in OPEC Plus. We'll see if there's an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine, where we can work together with Russia as well in OPEC Plus to try to bring about a measure of stability to global oil markets that will be good for the United States, for India, and for all of our partners and allies around the world. It will be a very different global market going forward, though, depending on the ability of the United States to fully consolidate the rehabilitation and restoration of Venezuela's extraordinary, potentially profitable $8 to $16 trillion oil reserves, and reintroduce that into global markets for the foreseeable future.
Okay, my last question is, Democrats have criticized the US operation in Venezuela. How would you evaluate the current political division in the US regarding this issue? And what is the level of public support among Americans?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, this was not done necessarily to win the support of the American people. It's not as if most Americans were focused before the military and law enforcement operation on the situation in Venezuela. So it remains to be seen if the transition to democracy and the rehabilitation of Venezuela's oil industry are successful. This will be seen as a success. If they're not successful, then this will be a stain on the Trump record. That will take weeks, months, perhaps years to play out. In terms of intra-party politics, we're welcome to messy democratic politics, as the people of India know as well as the people of the United States. The opposition will always look for opportunities to attack the incumbent. Most Democrats seem to be opposed to the Trump position. Some Democrats have taken the American national interest above partisan politics and said, we support the end of the narco-terrorist rule over 30 million impoverished Venezuelans under U.S. law. We'll see how this plays out. And even Republicans are not unanimously supportive of President Trump. this is not necessarily a clean partisan issue in the United States. There are concerns about the extent to which this comports with international legal obligations, and the Trump administration will have to play this out and explain to the American people, I think, more fully than they did at the initial press conference what the short-term and long-term goals are here. I think many Republicans are very much concerned about the prospect of American nation building in Venezuela after our failed efforts to nation build in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Libya, in Syria, and the extent to which we can be successful in Venezuela, I think will also determine whether or not this is seen as a policy success. So time will bear that out, but I think we're entering a very different era in the Western Hemisphere and in terms of America's relations with our most dangerous adversaries. Now that China, Russia, and Iran are seeing their fortunes come to a close in Venezuela and probably the Western Hemisphere.